You don't want to name them?
This is what you want.
Yeah.
I figured they're all.
Oh, thanks.
Where is everything go?
Is it go time? I believe we've passed the appointed 2:30, so we can call the meeting to order. And Tanya? Oh, you're not, we've got a substitute. All right, roll call, please.
Janine Junior, here. John Blatcher,
Here.
Ray Kavanaugh,
Here.
Derek Dudlow, here. Kevin Ober,
Here.
Bernie Wiegand.
Here. We're all here. Excellent, 100% attendance. As of this moment, I don't believe there are any agenda adjustments. So with that, we'll go to call to the audience, and we have an audience request to speak. So I'll go through the drill here of for public participation at audit committee meetings. During this portion of the meeting, the audit committee chair will maintain order by setting appropriate limitations. The following procedures related to the call to the audience portion of the audit committee meetings will be observed. All public comments for the meeting were accepted either in person or written form. Public comments will be read into the record by the committee chair or vice chair. Individuals attending the meeting in person and or addressing the audit committee being written comments should observe rules of propriety and good conduct and refrain from impertinent or slanderous remarks. TUSD serves students of all ages, so speakers should be aware that children may be present. The executive assistant of financial services will ensure each committee member receives a copy. At the conclusion of the call to the audience, the audit committee chair will ask if individual committee members wish to respond to criticism made by those who have addressed the committee, wish to ask staff to review a matter, or wish to ask that a matter be put on a future agenda. By law, at most, 2 committee members can address any single issue raised during the call to the audience. This card, contents of this card are public information. So I guess with that formality complete, we have a couple of requests, and randomly I'll pick request number 1, Sylvia Campley.
Good afternoon. My name is Sylvia Convoy. In my former positions as the top civil rights administrator in public and private institutions, I understand the importance of fulfilling the role of an independent investigator or auditor. My independence was always well guarded by my supervisors. My work was fully supported without question and certainly without retribution. Many attorneys with whom I have interfaced in my position have also defended the required independence and non-interference. I was chilled to the bone by what I witnessed during the August 27th governing board meeting as the superintendent gave his undermining pitch by wrongly and inappropriately assuming responsibility over the internal audit office and auditor, a role and function that belongs to the governing board, not the superintendent. He neither involved the governing board nor the audit committee. The agenda item was buried within the consent agenda, which is insulting to the public. Don't try to hide things from us. The audit committee members' statement and that of the independent auditor did inspire the board to amend the ill-proposed action. However, that amendment is not sufficient because there's still retaliatory action. There's still discrediting of the independent auditor. I recommend to this body that you immediately take a recommendation to the governing board as soon as possible, that they rescind the action that was taken to hire an external auditor to audit the internal auditor. If you have questions, or if the public has questions about the work that was done, there's a process in place to address that. But to have the superintendent, who had no part in the audit, come in and undo the work of the auditor is unsavory, to say the least. No audit report had been posted until the week or 2 weeks before several public information requests were made. So for half a year, the audit committee and the auditor have had their work hidden, not good for the public. I have watched the unraveling of one oversight component after another during this and the last administration. All are now gone, except for the independent auditor, which of course is the next takedown for the superintendent. Please do all you can in your power to ensure accountability and transparency. Please recommend to the full body of the board that they rescind the action that was taken. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And because I don't know your name, I will do it. Pilar Acosta Ruiz, correct?
Close, good job. Pilar, you got it perfect. So, and you have one more coming in. So my name is Pilar Acosta Ruiz, and thanks for letting me share to
All righty.
talk to you guys. So first of all, I want to say it is so inspiring as somebody who's watched this district since more than a decade to see an audit committee that's really got their stuff together. I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing and your strength in not caving to hiding things that I've seen happen for way too long. So I want to just echo, first of all, what Sylvia said. You know, to have watched what happened at that meeting was pretty pathetic. It took years to even get an internal auditor appointed in this district. And whenever something is exposed that's not favorable, the MO, the culture of this district sadly has been to either hide it under the rug or to try to destroy the person or get rid of the person or get rid of the department. So hang tight. I'm hoping to change that culture personally. And also last night, so somebody exposed another thing at the board meeting, which that person asked me to bring some packets I've shared with the chair and co-chair. But if you look at last night's meeting, call to the audience at 44 minutes and 44 seconds, you'll hear some more stuff that's probably really needs to be exposed. There's some potential violations of state law by one of the board members. And I just found out also that people in the city already knew about it because the same packet had been sent out months ago. So anyways, kudos to what all you're doing. I'm sure I have other things to say, but thank you, Martha, for doing the work you do, because when you do the kind of work that Martha does, you usually get thrown under the bus in this district, as you might have already seen. So hang tough, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And in addition, we have Hidalgo, certainly. You're up.
Okay, I'm up and I'm sounding like a broken record because I'm reinforcing what they're saying. If you've been in the district for a really long time, which I have been, not in it, but watching it, you have seen a lot of people thrown under the bus. As Pilar said, it took a really long time to get an independent auditor. And I imagine this is why. Because an independent auditor, if they're good at what they do, sometimes they bring up bad news. In my view, that's what you want. That's what a superintendent should want. They should want to hear what is the problem so that we can work on fixing the problem. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir because that's probably the case in your view as well. So I'm really just here to say, please maintain your independence. Please do not allow anybody to sneak in phrases that have to do with oversight from employees of the district. Because guess who those employees are? You all know, of course. So your community is watching. You're the very community that fought for an independent auditor. We're all a little older, a little grayer than we were when we started that fight, or a whole lot older and grayer, some of us. But we're watching, and we appreciate your work. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Now, at the conclusion of this, you have the right as members of the committee to make any comments you would like, wish this to ask staff to review something, or wish to ask any specific matter they reference to be put on an agenda. Does anybody have any comments relative to the public comment?
The action of the superintendent was extremely inappropriate to call for an independent review of the internal audit function and assert the fact that he is the, what's he call himself? Over the internal auditor?
He's the evaluator.
Evaluator. It is a material weakness in the internal controls at this school district, having the superintendent have anything to do with evaluating the internal audit function. It reminds me of Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco. All three executives there did that. And I was there for that.
Mm-hmm.
The superintendent is the number one suspect for misbehaving at any school district. That's why you have to have governance. He does not seem to understand the concept of governance. There's a governing board. They appoint some committees to do some things for them. The executives report to those committees and to the board. He has never showed up at an audit committee meeting. In my 50 years of working for Fortune 1000 companies, I don't recall a single CEO that didn't show up at audit committee meetings at least 3 or 4 times a year. He doesn't care about us. He doesn't think we're important. He doesn't understand he's the hired help. The number one thing on his evaluation list is increased student enrollment. How much student enrollment fall this year? 4,400?
Over 1,000.
Over 1,000?
No, it didn't fall 4,000 in one year.
How many?
I'm not allowed to.
Oh,
Over 1,000.
oh, you can't answer. Oh, the rules here. It was 400 people.
Yeah, 400, 1% or so.
So we need to send a message back to the governing board that we report to and say it is inappropriate to have this review because we need to work on our function. Yes, the internal audit function needs to be improved. It is woefully understaffed. It also does not have access to the right criteria. The internal auditor has done her risk assessment, but it's based not upon input from management, which it should be. Management should be providing to the internal audit function and this audit committee an enterprise risk management matrix with the controls against it. Should be providing to us a financial statement risk matrix and the controls against it. Same thing for operational, same thing for the various business processes that we look at. I have asked, and I'm not seeing any of that. It tells me that we're operating in a la-la land. And we need to change that. Of course, is this Arizona? I'm just new here. I've been here 2 years.
A lot of sun here.
US News and World Report just reported that Arizona ranks 47th in K through 12 education.
Yes.
Now, I'm originally from Arkansas. And we used to say, thank God for Mississippi, because they were always below us. Heck, you can't even say that here in Arizona. New Mexico's below us. I don't know who's 50. We need to get a hold of this situation and manage the risk. And do it in a professional manner, because there are risks to this school board. It looks very much like my former client, Memphis City Schools. They no longer exist. They went out of business because the enrollment kept going down. The funding went down, and they finally had to get combined with the districts around them, and they're gone. That's where this place is headed. It's maybe 10 or 15 years out there, but that's where it's going. The example would be, what's the utilization of the schools? 50%?
Mr. Chairman, I gotta get in here. This needs to get agendized.
Yeah.
This is way too much into the subject matter of an agenda item, not call to the public.
Well, he was just commenting relative to
It's
the
on way
statement.
beyond
All
that.
right,
It's
fine,
not
I'll
into
quit.
discussion regarding an agenda item.
all right.
Oh,
He's
oh,
right,
oh,
he's right. He's right.
yeah, you were beginning to do what you have a penchant for doing. I understand. So that's good, Bernie. Good comment.
Okay,
Anybody
okay.
else have any comments? Your turn to rest. That's it.
I'll be brief, but I do want to tag on to an item that was brought up as far as the idea of going out and hiring someone else to validate it for a lot of, and I want to just reassure people that I and others on the committee value the independence, and our mission as independent observers, and we also want to strengthen the independence of the internal audit function. So if anyone has any doubts that we don't think that's important, or wants to criticize, I want to assure you that is important to us. Amen.
Oh, you're here. That's good. Bernie, you have anything else?
I have no comments for the call to the public.
All right,
If I do, I will look to make an agenda item.
all righty. Good. Anybody else? All right, well, great. Thank you for your comments, by the way.
I submitted an online thing, am I too late?
I don't know what the protocol is. We went through it, and do you, I don't know.
She's from the.
Bernie, historically, if somebody who wanted to speak was late and we had moved on, have you historically reopened an item?
I think once an agenda item is completed, it is completed for that meeting.
Okay,
And I apologize that that might be the case here, but I don't know that we completed the agenda item.
We did.
we didn't, so I guess then therefore and because she took the time to come here, Lillian Fox, right?
Right.
Last but not least, Lillian Fox.
Okay, I sent this as an email to you guys. I don't know if you got it.
Yes.
Okay. It's a horrible conflict of interest for emails to you to go to the finance department, and that's what the crack on this was. I sent it to the audit committee and the finance department got it. Now, traditionally, who has provided support for you has been the board office, not the finance department at all. Now, unfortunately, at this point, one of the employees of the board office is married to the chief financial officer. It's a conflict of interest for her to even be in that job and for her to handle things for you or for the internal auditor. Anyway, what this is about is, if you read it, ClearGov doesn't work. I came from the computer industry years ago. I knew when I dealt with this thing right away that there was a problem. Either the finance department has screwed up in the way they submitted the budget book to it, or there's a problem with the software. The message back that I sent you attached to this is from their tech support, which says the budget's over 1,000 pages long and their servers can't handle that. We've never had a budget over 1,000 pages long. They run like 225 pages, 350 pages, that kind of thing. ClearGov's in the business of doing budgets. And so if this budget is too big for them to handle, I think there may be a problem on the finance side, but I don't know. It appears financial services never tested this, never used it, has never tried to print it themselves. I have requested over and over again from, using the stuff the chief financial officer will show you. It never works. I always get a message back that's at the end of this thing that says, they'll be with me in 3 hours. Weeks later, I have nothing from it. And I did it again this morning. And you don't have it attached to that, but I attached these one at 7:30 this morning saying I'd have it in 3 hours. Nothing. The budget was never approved by the board. They never saw the actual budget. So this budget book has a transmittal letter signed only by the superintendent Trujillo. It is not signed by the board because they've never seen it. When I complained to the governing board about how could you guys approve a budget you never saw? None of them had ever seen it. This is the only time TUSD budget has been approved without the budget board actually seeing a copy of it and approving the actual budget. I hope you can do something to fix these problems because I would still want a copy of the fiscal year 2025 budget. And I don't have one, and I. 3 minutes. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Since we have one more speaker, the same, opportunity exists for board members. Anybody have any desire for a comment or a question to put on something on the agenda?
Yeah, I would think we should add this to our next agenda to discuss the issues brought up by Ms. Fox, because specifically the independence of the audit committee mailbox contact that needs to be clearly specified that it goes to the chair, in my opinion, and not to anyone else. And then it's up to you to decide what action to take from them.
Yeah, Tanya, let's do that. I think that's a very good suggestion by Ray.
And then the other issue tied to this, what was brought up here is the budget book. The status of it and what can be done to make that available to concerned people. It certainly sounds like there should be, the
Accessible in one way
superintendent
or
talks about
another.
transparency so much, and I don't think we're transparent if we don't reveal the budget, because in the internal audit world and in the auditing world, the budget is the primary internal control. You can have a budget. You're basically saying everything's out of control. And that's a big problem.
Tanya, could you add a budget discussion and availability or accessibility also to the next agenda? Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the audit committee meeting of August 28th. Anybody have an opinion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any comments? Then how about a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimously approved. Yes, next one, I had spoken briefly with another committee member about this, but I thought, I'd keep it on the agenda, recognizing that we were thinking about, a postponement. However, maybe a quick status report of where we think the charter update, our charter update is for hopefully a conclusion after this extended discussion at the next meeting of our charter. Any comments by any board members about where we're at and where we think we ought to go for next month?
I've seen the draft that I think Rob Ross worked with Janine on, and so I think it covers the issues that we need to cover, and it strengthens, again, the independence of the committee and indirectly the internal audit office. So to me, that's our number one mission, is to get this finalized and get it to the governing board so that it can be adopted, because we've seen frequently that the superintendent references the old audit charter, which obviously we felt is inadequate, or we would be working on a new one. And he's using that to support his agenda. So I think the longer we delay voting this and getting it finalized, the more at risk we are, to your point, that if there's no rule out there for an oversight, it can be seen as a way to get around internal controls and good governance. And so the longer we delay, the bigger the risk.
Thank you for your comment, Ray. Any other comments?
Yeah, so I'll add that the draft that's dated 9/17/24 is the version that Rob and I went through, and that's the version that you've seen. Like essentially approved, right, from a draft perspective. I know there were some elements that Vice Chair that Ray wanted to add into that 9/23 is show some of the edits that he's considering. So I think that there's still, it sounds like some fine tuning that has to happen before it goes to the governing board in final. But wasn't sure if there were any objections, any concerns, anything specific to the 9/17 draft and the 9/23 draft that just made available, but the 9/17 draft that needs to be discussed.
Great.
And if that's a no, it's fine. Or if we can't do that. I'm learning the rules, but just wanted to make sure that everyone's input or agreement or disagreement, anything there is clear before we move forward into some fun stuff.
Well, I think the goal is literally to have it on the agenda next month
Okay.
and pass it next month. So we're serious, because I know I'm in alignment with Ray's comments that we need to really get our quote operating document in front of the board. Great, thank you, everybody.
And I want to mention, both the drafts are on the docs. So you can compare them, and the one that the more recent one, there's some areas highlighted in yellow just for some discussion, and there was some, the point being trying to strengthen again the independence of the audit committee and try to blunt some of the heavy-handed dealings that we've seen recently. So that's what it's all about, but hopefully we can get it voted on in the next agenda.
Yes, yes. Great. Obviously, there's hardly any need for 5.02 because we never really need to receive complaints. Just kidding. I don't believe we have received any. Have we? I haven't seen any.
Well, that one that came in today to the audit committee, would that not fit here?
You've got to be kidding, right? That it came in today? Are
Yeah,
you
that was
serious or?
No, there's one that was forwarded over to me. Let's see.
Well, then. Bad on
And
me.
that's something that Ms. Fox spoke to earlier. That was addressed to the audit committee. which I took to the audit committee complaint line.
Oh, okay, I didn't. So I guess I should have.
And I don't know if is it, maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought that's what that was.
Well, then practically speaking, with what we've asked to put on the agenda next month, I think we're addressing. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, great. On to, item number 6, study information, 6.01. Update status report from the one and only internal auditor. So we know who we're talking about now. Your turn.
Thank you, sir. My name is Martha Smith, the one and only internal auditor for TUSD right now. Ah, it's been a wonderful week and a wonderful month. I'm just going to preface my conversation with that. There's over 8 attachments to this. I did spend quite a bit of time on the agenda that I passed out to all of you ladies and all of you gentlemen. So that way you could follow along, because again, it's a little bit, in other words, put on your seatbelts. There's going to be a little turbulence here. Okay. The final EDI report was not allowed or permitted to be spoken about in the last meeting agenda because it had not been provided or had not been updated into the governing or board docs, I would say, because publishing is one thing, but being in board docs is where it allows me to go ahead and address it with you as the committee members. Since I wasn't allowed, or that wasn't permitted because there was other things in there, I want to go through, and I'm not going to take a lot of time. Most of it is going to be open for you guys is to ask me any questions that you might have, but the attachments themselves right there, attachment number 1 is A. And it has to do with the way that it was provided. The final EDI report was provided to the governing board with a memorandum. It had the EDI report and it had the EDI or the management responses and commitments that were provided. However, that was not what was published. And the website, the memorandum of the internal audit was excluded. That to me is a complete item that should have not been dismantled in that fashion. That's number 1. Talking about transparency, if I provide a full, finished, completed report to the governing board, it should be provided as such when members of the public request that finished report, and it wasn't. Okay, I received a couple of requests. I provided the documentation. I was told that and however it was provided would be communicated to me. That never occurred either. So therefore, again, we look at the transparency part, it's non-existent. When it was, I did contact the communications department and I asked them, can you please make sure that this is published the way that it was supposed to? It also included the auditor, the impairment, which is Exhibit C, the impairment of internal audit independence. That is a requirement by GAGAS, the generally accepted accounting or auditing standards, that requires that if there's any interference from the superintendent, or not specifically because they don't obviously say the superintendent, but if there's any interference with the internal audit in their process, to go ahead and state it as such. I did. I have shared that document several times with the governing board. I have shared that document several times with the superintendent, and I have shared that document several times with you guys as well. And all that has to do is listing the impairments that I have gone through. The biggest one being that the person that was assigned to work with me during the audit was removed, but not removed. There was an email, but the email didn't state that that person was going to be removed. The superintendent just stated that he was taking over. You could see all that documentation on Exhibit H. That is all the relevant communication from the time that I started an audit all the way to it's completed and finalized. And it states exactly what transpired. The reason why it's an impairment to internal audit is because if I am working along with an individual and we're talking and I'm understanding everything that is occurring in that department, and then I have the exit meeting and we are having a conversation about, hey, these are the findings. What are your thoughts? What am I as an internal auditor not understanding? What is it that, I missed? And that's really my goal, to make sure that it is specific, that it is correct. when that appointed individual is telling me, nope, I agree with everything that you're saying, then I go ahead and say, okay, this is how I'm going to be stating it. This is the criteria that we're going to go over. I'll provide you the preliminary reports for you to look at it. And that way I am basing my preliminary report on the conversation that I had with that person at that exit meeting. They have been there with me from the beginning all the way till I complete that report. So at the end, when I provide that preliminary report and then the person changes by saying, I'm going to go ahead and have somebody else address these things. Okay, that's fine, but tell me, and then the person that you're appointing, have them communicate with the person that I was talking to. So that way they know why certain things are in that report. But to have people respond, there was 28 findings. Out of those 28 findings, 6 went unanswered. And the actual purpose of management's responses and commitments is not to come back and say, I don't agree with this. Well, if you don't agree with it, that's why you have the 10 business days to come and talk to me. But talk to me. If you don't talk to me, I don't know what you're objecting to. If you don't talk to the person that I spent over a month with, and they're not sharing with you what transpired in that exit meeting, what are you responding to? Something that you're objecting that you don't even understand? That is uncalled for. That impedes my process in every possible way. And then to have the responses from the people that by the way, I went to most of them, I spoke to them, and I clarified the things that I was writing about. And I went specifically to HR. I went specifically to employee relations. I went specifically to not Mr. Hernandez, but I went to some of his employees addressing particular areas. That's not an extension of my scope of the audit. It's a performance audit. That means if you bring up something that is going to impact the efficiency and the effectiveness of that particular audit, I'm going to find out and see if there's any validity. If there's no validity, it's not going to be written up. But if I find it to be very much valid, guess what? I'm going to go and speak to the people that have the ability to give me those answers. It's not a extension of my scope. Is my due diligence as an internal auditor to make sure that whenever I am going to go ahead and issue a report, that is indeed going to be accurate, validated, and substantiated. So each one of the things that I have put in there, like Exhibit B, I'm not going to go through each one of the EDI reports because again, I don't want to get into the MRCs, given that in my opinion, an MRC addresses the issue. It says what is going to happen with that issue, how it's going to be corrected, and the date then we could anticipate being corrected. Most of them did not provide any of that. They were all very much back and forth, something that happens at the exit meeting. During the exit meeting, if you don't like what I'm saying, if you don't like what I'm seeing, argue with me. That's okay. It's okay to agree to disagree. That's the whole point of an audit. Have the conversation. Say why I am misunderstanding something. But don't come back and just say, I disagree with you. Great. Tell me why. And don't argue with me on a piece of paper that has already been issued. It's issued. And you have 10 days to discuss it. You have 10 days to come and approach me. I'm not that far. I have an open door policy. You could call me. It's okay. So Exhibit C has to do with the impairment of the internal auditor. It states specifically what policies and what principles. I found out later on that I'm supposed to follow these policies and principles. However, if the governing board doesn't support them, if the superintendent is not required to adhere to them, then what am I doing? I cannot personally be independent if I don't have the backing of the governing board. I cannot personally proceed and say there's an impairment to my independence if the superintendent is allowed to step in and move people around at will. That distracts me from doing my job, and my objectivity all of a sudden is conflicting because he's my evaluator. So I either conform to what he's asking me to do and compromise my ethics, or stand by my ethics and go through the nightmare that I'm going. And so I chose ethics. Have any questions? I already addressed the public request, which is the Exhibit D. The non-publishing of the report as completed. Oh, Exhibit F. Because of the issue that I'm having and the impairment of my independence, I have requested the governing board to provide me with an executive meeting. I need to have a voice. They're supposed to be my appointed supervisors. The governing board never provided me a response. I received a response from the superintendent. That's not who I requested. The superintendent is not part of the governing board. So I'm waiting for the governing board to go ahead and provide me a response. I did withdraw temporarily my request for an executive meeting based on the instructions provided by Dr. Trujillo, who again is not the governing board. And that states that the only issue that I could have, the memo is also there attached. The memorandum included 4 items. One was the impairment of the internal auditor. The other one was the overstepping of authority from the superintendent on to the internal auditor. And that is a conflict of interest, but is an employee. He is an employee. Therefore, if the 3 topics didn't apply, that one should have still stood, and I should have still been granted that executive meeting, but I wasn't. But again, like I said, the governing board has not provided me a response. Dr. Trujillo provided me a response, but I don't recognize him as part of the governing board. And I believe that I'm going to go ahead and close by stating that internal audit's goal is never to be in any way confrontational with anything. The goal is to work with management. The goal is to work with leadership. And the goal is very much to provide a foot forward of how do we improve things? How do we get better? How do we get from A through Z? Is never to say, hey, you're doing something bad. You know what? If you want me to report something good, you have a communications department. They do a great job on that. My job is not to say how great you are. My job is to say, according to these principles, policies, and procedures that are DFA, TUSD policies that you're violating, we should adhere to them or don't bother having policies.
Comments, please. I mean, we have a lot of audit experience sitting on this side of the table. I'd love to have a little bit of interchange with the internal.
I'll interchange. First, I went through other materials related to the EDI audit that Martha performed. I wanted to assure everyone that Martha followed the standard audit process as far as from announcement to the department head who was designated by Trujillo to be Mr. Charvati. And then she worked with him on the field work, and she went over the initial MRCs with him, and then completed the audit report, issued the audit report. And it appears that after it was released, at some point, Trujillo decided he didn't like it, so he took steps to write his, he called it a rebuttal. It was his MRC, which is after the fact, which is outside of the normal audit process, so he had no business doing that. But then he took it upon himself, 200 and some page rebuttal, which was absolutely silly, that someone who's supposedly running a large school district takes that time and recruits others in the administrative staff to try to help him find ways to rebut the audit report, which was again done according to IIA standards. So it's troubling that all happened, because it certainly is taking away time that Martha could be spending on other audits. So we have a potential that the audit schedule may get delayed along the way, because you can only do so much. And if you're spending your time trying to answer some of these ridiculous complaints that have been brought up, and the effort to what appears to be to take some punitive action with an outside audit firm, I wanted to just lost it here, but I had pulled up. I had contacted the president of the governing board and expressed my concern that that was not an appropriate way to spend $50,000 of our taxpayer money. And it's not necessary. The type of review is typically done as a peer review that is not, there's not an external audit, accounting, whatever firm hired to do that.
Right.
So, and obviously, Rio doesn't understand that process either. And yet he takes it upon himself to criticize many things, try to undermine independence. And in the name of what he's saying is transparency, his transparency idea is to smear mud on things. And it's stupid. So again, I think your audit process and the trigger audit followed standard protocol, so there should be no complaints.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will go ahead and kind of make a correction. I have a couple of corrections to make. The MRCs were provided within the 10 business days of the time allowed. And there was an email that was sent by Dr. Trujillo just stating that he would go ahead and have the administrators responsible for that particular area address in response to those particular questions or particular findings. The thing that I found a little bit, I was taken back by, is that I had spoken to most of the individuals that provided those responses, but not one of them reached out to me and say, hey, I'm confused. What are we talking about here? How can we clarify this? Or any of that reaching over. I went ahead and did my due diligence by getting the information that I needed, but it wasn't reciprocated. So I found that to be a little bit of what happened. I get along with you, but yet there was no collaboration when it came to the responses. The other thing that I did want to clarify and that I have to clarify is that there's been quite a bit of emails. I mean, I've had more communication received by Dr. Trujillo than I have in the 5 years, almost 5 years that I have been here. Just in the past couple of months, I had numerous emails. But one of the things that he brought up, and I agree with him, and I have to apologize for this because like I've said before, I will own up to my mistakes. I incorrectly used a word that is reserved for legal standing, and that was a gag order. While he didn't tell me, or, you're prohibited from speaking to this, that was the third time that it was asked, were you told not to talk about the EDI on the last meeting? Was it specifically so? So at the end, instead of saying it's essentially a gag order, I just kept on saying, no, I was not permitted to speak about it because it was correct. I received information from the governing board president, Ms. Luna Rose, and I received direction from Dr. Trujillo as well that said it's best to keep it private and it won't be published. It won't be put on the website, which to me, according to the principles and standards that I'm supposed to follow, if it's not published, I cannot speak to it. So I needed to clarify. And by the way, that comment was not made to be inappropriate or intentional or malicious. It was just something that came out because I was saying like 3 times that, no, I can't speak about it. No, I can't speak about it. It was, in essence, it's a blank response or a blank direction. And that's when the word is, in essence, a gag order came out, but it wasn't intended by any means to be malicious or intentionally misleading anybody. So I just wanted to clarify. With that, please consider my update to the governing board, or sorry, to the audit committee.
Well, thank you. Because we have so many years of audit experience sitting on our side of the table, how unusual, and I am not a professional auditor, so how unusual is what occurred? If anybody would speak to that just for the edification, maybe of the chairman, but anybody else in the room, including the gentleman sitting to the right of me, who's our contact on the board. I'm confused personally, and I would enjoy hearing your opinions.
Yeah, and listen, I'm gonna be honest and say my opinion in the room may not be the popular one. I'll lay that out there, right? So it's not uncommon, in my experience, it's not uncommon. I think that the difference here is the establishment of the authority that it sounds like has not been aligned on and solidified, at least in the right formal channels, right? I have no idea what the governing board thinks about how the superintendent and our internal audit function should work together. I haven't had any involvement with them. I mean, maybe as the chair, maybe you do, but we also only talk to the governing board once a year. How do we establish any level of authority, accountability process for when there are disagreements if we don't have more interaction in that, right? So
There is, The DEFA policy actually states that, and this is where a little bit of a conflict came about. The DEFA policy is written specifically to address how does this process work? And the process is that if you have an auditee and it disagrees with me, it's okay to disagree with me, then we escalate it to the superintendent. The issue arises when the superintendent decides to become the auditee. And that's the part that where there is no process or procedure.
Right, so we need one.
Yes, absolutely, we do.
We need-
And we
we
discover
need-
this.
Now, in this instance, it was also the actual head of the DEI was gone. At the
Yes.
point, so someone else stepped in, and so I'm conflicted, I'll be honest, but I don't have the history that a lot of folks in the room have, right? So I am conflicted in the sense that there is this case where if the superintendent thought that putting you in contact with that one person was the right representative, and then got the report back and said, oh, he did not really understand this area enough to answer, and decided that he needed to step in, I don't know that I take large conflict with that.
No,
And I don't have any concerns about how you handle the
Mhm.
process, let me be clear about that,
Mhm.
no whatsoever. I think what I am challenged by though is that if you spoke to all of the individual heads and got responses from them, there shouldn't be an avenue for him to then, this is what happened, should not be an avenue for him to then overpower what they already gave me. So my question to you is, were there verbal conversations, or do you have documentation that this is what you said to me?
I have both.
Okay, because I think that's what we need to make sure that we're doing consistently, documentation, we gotta
Yes.
make sure that Stellar said you were always protected, so that was one question, okay. But yeah, for me, it's not uncommon for auditing and auditor to disagree. It happens all the time, I mean, our goal is not to be your friend, respect it.
Yeah.
But we're not here to be your friend, I mean, and that's the honest truth, and that's the only way we're able to hold the district accountable, is if, like we've been talking about, we maintain that independence, but with the understanding that we're all supposed to be on the same team.
Right.
And so it doesn't sound like we're all operating on the same team. That's the challenge that I have, and I don't know how we got off from being on the same team. I don't have anybody to blame. So, you know, I just, but for me, it's how do we get back on the same team? How do we start having these conversations around when there's a conflict at the superintendent level? What are the steps? I know there are a lot of questions around what our level of oversight with the internal audit function is, right? And so there's some of that we're trying to address in the audit charter, about how much of that should just be a conversation with the governing board. There's a part of me that's like, how much of this really should just be a conversation? And I know with open meeting law and things that,
Yeah.
there's a way that it has to be structured, but I just don't, it seems like it seems like having a conversation, just an open and transparent one, can help clarify a lot of it. It doesn't mean that it's gonna go away. Superintendent may still disagree, you have to be allowed to disagree, right? So we have to
Absolutely.
work through that, but for it to escalate to a point where there's an independent review that we're talking about, I'm just, that part I'm not clear on either. Is this the first time that this, I don't know if I can answer this question. Is this the first time there's been this level of pushback on an audit report from the superintendent?
Well, that's the thing. I have been doing internal audit for over 10 years.
Mhm.
And in reality, this is the first time that I've had a person in leadership that doesn't speak with me. That just opts to take different directions. His style of management is different to me. It's not something that I'm accustomed to.
Which
So
is fine.
therefore, yeah.
It's fine, right? We have to.
No,
that's fine.
and I understand that
I
part.
guess my question is, has this superintendent in this role with you, is this the first time there's been this level of pushback on a report?
It's been this is the first time that has been this level of pushback, but there has been others where he has interfered. So yes, it's just I've never taken it to this level because I have never really, the previous times that has happened, there wasn't a report that was already issued.
Okay.
So that's
So
what
I
the
guess,
interference.
so where I'm going asking that question is, this is like the first time, how do we jump right to
Mhm.
Yeah.
external review? Why is there not some internal mediation with the audit committee, internal auditor, superintendent, governing board first, before we spend district funds to do that, right? So I just have a lot of questions around how we jump to that so quickly without first internally trying to remedy the situation.
I think the reason we're discussing it is it surprised a lot of us sitting at this table. John, you had a comment?
Yeah, what I'm volunteering to do is I want to shadow our internal auditor at our next audit. Go to the kickoff meeting, look at the work papers, go to the closing meeting. See the things she's doing in detail, which I think she's doing fine. Now, there will be some tweaks that I will try to teach her about the stuff I've learned over the last 50 years. And then, evaluate and come back and report to you guys, because it's something we can be doing. I think we should request that they don't spend this money on stuff.
I
Well,
already did that, and she said no.
is there a way, and Bernie, has this ever happened where the audit committee has injected itself on kind of an expenditure of this size or something similar to what was requested for her audit?
Well, I don't believe there's been precedent for this process ever.
Okay.
In the history of the internal audit function. Although my time in this committee and familiarity to that function is about half of its existence. Yet I'm not sure that it's not entirely clear as to what our total function is or role with respect to the internal audit function. And so I'm not sure that what was just mentioned is an appropriate action of the committee. I don't know that a committee member or a member of public could do that if they were so allowed and so inclined to do. But I don't know that that fits within the scope of the committee's responsibility. And to certainly have that then come back as a report to the committee would seem like it's starting to bring it into the scope of the committee's function, role with the internal audit function.
Which again is the reason to get our
that's
charter
I'm
done.
really uncomfortable with that. I would want to do something more to really solidify that that's something that we would do as a committee. And then necessarily have a member of the committee to do so, or members perhaps. But then we gotta be careful that we don't get into an open meeting law issue or the need for it to have postings and so on, because there's a quorum of membership that would do it if it's more than one member.
Well, since we have a highly paid attorney sitting in the middle of the table in a green shirt, what are your thoughts relative to this discussion and the direction we might or might not take?
Well, I generally would agree with Bernie that having clarification on what the committee's authority given by the board over internal audit, that would be most helpful to making sure that there isn't some going outside the authority the board is given. And I agree that there hasn't been a lot of discussion with the board about this committee or about internal audit. And that's a conversation that would probably be useful to have for everybody, just so that, Mr. Blackshire's making this generous offer. Is that something the board envisions members of this committee to do or not? And, I can't speak because there hasn't been that level of discussion. I can't tell you that the board has opined one way or the other. I don't know that Mr. Romero disagrees with me on that, but it sounds like a healthy conversation. And I don't know what the next audit is, but if it's at all related, has any student or other confidential information in it, I would probably advise against it until the board takes some affirmative step to say that a member of the committee can review confidential information. It may not be. It may be strictly all stuff that's public record, and that would be great. And I wouldn't be as concerned about the confidentiality piece of it. But that still leaves what is the board's intent for the authority of 3/4 of this table. That probably wasn't helpful at all.
No, well, no, it's a little bit of a, you know, put some parameters on it. Val, you as our liaison and a member of the board, what are you thinking based on what's been discussed here in the direction?
Well, you make a really good point, you know, having that discussion with the board. And again, getting these other policies where they're at, and like you said, how it escalated from here to there. As board members, as one of the newer board members, I'm still getting my feet wet as far as figuring these things on out and not being part of that world, you know. I'm learning as I go in certain things. When it was brought up, usually, you know, 3 days before, you know, the meeting, and who do you go to on certain things? And I even get sometimes at the call to the audience, people mentioning things that are on an agenda that I didn't study. And then it kind of question because I did my homework, but as not as much as I could. How this board or how this committee discusses with the board, that might be a good step to have. Where I don't know, because I know we do our annual report to the board, and I don't know if it's possible to do a quarterly or if a special thing comes up where we reach out to, you know, board Yolanda, and, you know, or however it gets onto the agenda that we have an issue that we want to talk about, because this would have to be done publicly, correct?
Mostly, yes, almost all, yes. There may be some things that could fit into an executive session, but those are very limited. But this is a policy discussion, right? This is
Yeah.
So that's all public.
Yeah, and having that conversation so that the board knows that the committee is invested in this, finding out what our desires for this committee to be is. And I think that, again, also should be, especially if we're going to be coming up with this new charter with the board, to have that discussion. And when we do that, have as many, you know, of the committee members there so they know exactly what's transpiring. And again, I'm not sure how that all looks, whether there's a presentation, like we get study action, things that are done presented, where we have a few of you that can talk to the board. And then from there, we can kind of discuss as a board. And that way just brings us together on the same team. Issues that pop up, policy, hey, we need to start looking at these. And then we talk to Rob Ross and say, hey, this kind of came up, we don't have a policy for it. Let's see how we address this. But I think that's great to get in front of the board. And even though, like I said, I understand you guys have this, you know, discussion of this up to $50,000 for, you know, external, you know, in entity as far as that goes. I didn't know any different when I voted for this. I do know that there was a caveat on it that it was going to be, you know, superintendent would choose who this would be. I had made the motion to have that removed, that it should come to the governing board. And we should decide, we give it to procurement, and then based on the information that they have, comes back to the governing board, and then we would have that call. But knowing, again, like I said, I didn't know who to talk to ask. Now we have all these experts here that could guide us a little bit more, because us as board members don't know everything. We know a lot of our strengths, you know, individually. But this is helpful.
But let me throw in something here. The $50,000 for an outside review is crazy. I completed one last January with my partner, and the internal audit department that we reviewed had 14 full-time people. And we looked at a lot of reports. He spent a lot of time on site, and we charged them all of $25,000. There's one person. She does 5 audits a year.
6.
Yeah. Hey.
Don't diminish that accomplishment.
Have any of you ever hired somebody from outside to come in and do a review of the quality?
Yeah, I mean, so every 5 years, you
Yeah.
know, there's a quality.
So how much did you
assessment.
pay?
I don't know that we were able to create a peer group, so we
Yeah,
didn't necessarily
yeah.
have to,
Yeah.
so.
That didn't cost you anything.
Right, it didn't cost you
No,
anything.
it cost anything, yeah.
And the reason we did this one was the governing board wanted it done. And so they selected people with the expertise that they were interested in. It was 25,000, but it was reviewing what she's done in the last year is few years is not $50,000 worth of work.
And again, as a board member, we don't know, we don't know.
Yeah.
You know, having heard this conversation, would I have voted differently based on the expertise in here? Yes, because we rely on your expertise, because I can't be good at everything.
Yeah.
I can only be good at barbecuing.
We don't expect you to be an expert on it.
Yeah. So that's why we rely on you. And I think that first step might be having a study action meeting with the audit committee, talking to the board.
Rob, are you in alignment with that kind of discussion?
I think that's what my recommendation was a few minutes ago.
Uh,
And I can help Mr. Romero, you know, he knows the ways to get things on an agenda.
And I presume we'd all be willing to participate in that and whatever's required to do that. I think that coupled with the charter would be, you know, kind of get the board to understand where we're coming from for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that was productive lead into a lot of discussions that you let us thank you.
You're welcome.
So update report from the external auditor now, correct?
Yeah.
One of our three sources of the facts.
All right, so I sent out a presentation. Hopefully you all had a chance to review it, but I was asked to come here and give a brief update on the status of the district's financial statement audit, which also encompasses a single audit and completion of the USFR compliance questionnaire. And so this is just a brief summary of where we're at. We issued our engagement letter and got that signed in May, several months ahead of last year's timeframe. We were able to do a lot of preliminary field work, and I'll get into exactly what that is. From May through August, September is a very busy time for the district. So we sort of let them finalize their trial balance, do all the journal entries that are necessary to prepare for the annual financial report. And then this upcoming month, we'll start with the final field work procedures, and then as if plans go accordingly, we'll draft the financial statements in November and hopefully have those issued by December. And then have the supplemental reports, that's the single audit report and the USFR compliance questionnaire completed in hopefully January, February at the latest. So what we've done so far is our preliminary field works include just update our general understanding of internal controls at the district that relate to financial reporting. And this is a financial statement audit, so different than what your internal audit function typically deals with, but there is some overlap there. We gained an understanding of internal controls at a district-wide level, but also at specific transactional levels. We performed some very preliminary analytics over certain account balances. We do significant tests of controls over non-payroll expenditures, payroll expenditures, as well as journal entries. We start performing some of our data analytic procedures, which includes Benford's Law, which really uses some analytic procedures to identify where maybe riskier areas are and sample from those areas. We look at employee versus vendor information. So we'll compare vendor addresses or vendor phone numbers to employee addresses or employee numbers to identify any potential conflicts of interest, any potential transactions that maybe need to be scrutinized or looked at further. And then we'll also use our data analytic procedures to search for any potentially risky or suspicious journal entries. So that's all in terms of those initial tests of controls. Is the idea. There's certain transactions we have to look at as part of this being a single audit, but the idea is to hopefully identify the riskier areas and test those areas as well. Some other work that we performed was just rollovers of fund balance to ensure that all the funds have correctly rolled over their balances. Test work over those major federal programs that we're required to look at as part of the single audit. This year, currently, we're required to look at the special education cluster and the Education Stabilization Fund, which is the ESSER funds, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. If the district does have any gear funds that relate to those are included there as well. If need be, it's still preliminary work. We need to reanalyze the federal programs that we're looking at, and we may need to add additional federal programs depending on how the final numbers shake out. And then lastly, we did a lot of work related to the USFR compliance questionnaire, looking at budgets that are required to be reported to the Arizona Department of Education, CEDAR reporting, transportation reporting, student attendance, IGAs, procurement cards, credit cards, cash receipts, bank account disbursements, CTED, travel, classroom site fund, tax credit bond, travel expenditures, and then a ton of compliance with student activities, whether it revolves around receipts for student activities, disbursements for student activities, just the appointment of treasurers and controls in place over student activities.
What does the USFR stand for?
Uniform System of Financial Records.
That's a state law.
It's a document that's put together, I believe, by the Department of Education and the Auditor General. I think the Auditor General primarily leads it, but ADE does get in there and help out with some areas. Got separate people in the room that could probably correct me if I'm wrong too.
Yeah.
External.
It is
auditors.
specifically to Arizona.
Yes.
Okay.
Very lengthy document. I think it's about 120 questions on it, about 25, 30 pages long. They keep changing the format and the portal that's used, so it sort of prints out a little different each year. But very extensive and covers a lot of areas, probably outside of a normal financial statement audit. All right, the final fieldwork plan is to wrap up some of our preliminary work. There's still some items outstanding. We're working with the district. We have some outstanding items on their side that we're waiting to hear back from, and there's some outstanding items on our side where we're waiting to either provide them some information or let them know that the responses that we've received thus far are accurate, complete, what we need to move forward with those areas of the audit. And then coming up these next 2 months, we'll really focus on some final account balances. The district needs to finalize their trial balance and general ledger before we start some of this test work, as well as a lot of the supplemental schedules that they provide us for capital assets, compensated leave, as well as some of the debt-related items. And so once we receive those, we can really start on all these areas listed in the final account balances.
So in your internal control testing, did you come across any situations where that test work led you to believe you cannot rely on those internal controls?
At this point, no. Like I said, we're still wrapping up some stuff. There's still a few items outstanding where we're waiting for responses, but nothing to our inkling at this point that would say, oh, yeah, your internal controls over disbursements or payroll are deficient. We're gonna have findings and we can't rely on those. There's nothing to that nature at this point.
So you made no changes to the audit procedures based upon negative findings, is what you're saying.
Correct, yes. The original audit plan, when we went out to test those engagements and the original test work, and the results of that test work has not led us to add additional selections, adjust our procedures, look at additional items or anything of that nature.
How do you determine which federal program you should sign?
Yeah, so there's extensive guidance from the federal government on this, but the idea is first you get all the federal programs listed, And then you look at the biggest federal programs that meet,
Materials, dollars.
there's a dollar threshold. Typically for a lot of entities, it's about 750,000. TUSD is a lot larger, so their threshold's a lot higher. And then we assess those programs. So if a program, let's say, hasn't been looked at for 2 years, we're required to look at it. So if special education wasn't looked at last year or the year before and it meets these dollar threshold criteria, we're actually required to look at it. There's no additional assessment. For all the other federal programs that maybe we've looked at in the last year or two, there's specific assessment requirements that we go through for each federal program, whether there's been additional monitoring by an outside federal agency, whether the federal government has deemed that program higher risk, which they did the last several years for some of the ESSER grants, but they didn't this current year. Just a lot of items like that that go into the individual assessment. And then there's actually a sub-level of federal programs that maybe aren't the biggest federal programs at the district, but meet this sort of middle level criteria that we're required to assess some of those as well and determine whether there's a risky program in that area that we need to look at.
How do we define what's risky?
That's all determined by the federal government. That they spit out the requirements, and I can definitely provide those.
Forgive me for
That's
those who
the
know
Department
the
of
answer to this,
Education.
but I'm.
No, the overall federal government. So,
Which agency puts it out?
the Office of Budget and Management,
Oh,
so
OMB.
OMB,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Yes, Bernie.
Relatively simplistic question for you, I think. We are in the first year of a 3-year, commitment, right?
I think we're in the, like in terms of the audit work,
Yes, I apologize, we're in the
second year of, I believe, a 5-year.
5 year. I was wrong altogether. In at least this coming year, would the proposed engagement letter be available to us prior to May? As a committee, to be able to look at in order to fulfill our current charter obligation? And do you foresee that for the remainder of or do you see anything that would otherwise forestall that process to then not allow the interim or the preliminary field work to begin as you've got it shown here in future years?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that would potentially stall that is just all the different resources we use in developing those engagement letters. We use all those different audit guides out there that are issued by organizations like the AICPA to make sure that the language in those engagement letters are updated each year for all the appropriate standards that have happened over the last year or two. If that guidance isn't out, then it's hard for us to necessarily issue an engagement letter that maybe meets all the requirements that it needs to. What we can always do is reissue an engagement letter. So if it's really important that this committee sees that engagement letter before August, we can definitely draft one. It may not have all the requirements in there that we want it to, and there may be subsequent changes to it, and we may, depending on when it's signed, may need to reissue it to be re-signed. But that doesn't mean we can't start the audit after the initial engagement letter has been signed. If that answers your question.
Well, just that we need to fulfill that obligation unless we were otherwise able to come up with an alternate means.
Yeah.
To have some interaction at a point that is before any significant audit work was completed. And I'm not sure, and I don't want to necessarily get off topic here, but whether or not there would be a other milestone that we could be shooting for rather than prior to commencement.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely something we can shoot for this next year and forthcoming, and trying to get something out to you in like in a March, April timeframe, if that works.
And again, this particular year, we did that was reviewed by the committee in, our table.
Okay.
Which seems to be consistent with what you're saying here. Is
Yeah.
that then the final, or your actual engagement letter was then, moved to the board. I have to see when, but, approved and then, formalized so that you could begin in May at whatever point in May you began.
Yeah,
Any other questions? Well, thank you. Hopefully it all goes the way it's supposed to, right?
that's the plan.
You know, the first thing that goes is the plan. So, we're, from the printed version, we had a minor change to our agenda. The next up is our, the fiscal year 25 budget book update from the CFO. Whose picture is on the screen, correct?
You're not doing 6.04? The hiring of an. Printed version is off.
The board doc version, right? Version.
Oh, okay.
See, we moved you up.
All right. So, budget. Easy enough. So, as I communicated with all of you, what was it, the Tuesday after Labor Day, the new digital budget book is now published for public consumption. So I'm gonna kind of go through how you get there, just so that to kind of make an awareness for all of you. So this is our beautiful new homepage. Scroll towards the bottom, you got these gray boxes. If you click on financial info. I know, there's a lag between my laptop. Under budget info and reports, you'll see budget 2025 or budget 25 budget. When you click here, you're taken to a new website hosted by a company called ClearGov. ClearGov is in the business of not just providing access to budget books, they provide a lot of other products related to transparency, whether it's, budgeting, personnel management, things like that. We've only hired them to do budget books. We've only hired them to do a digitized version of the budget book. The governing board received a copy of this budget book before you did. Obviously, I talked to them before I talked to you. So the governing board received a copy of this the Friday prior to Labor Day. So right before I told you it was going to be around. It is, honestly, this is 4 months of a lot of work, mostly by me and my team. There's a lot of great information, things that we never used to publish in the very antiquated PDF version. That PDF version that's been mentioned, that was 250 pages, was 250 pages of a lot of Excel spreadsheets. It told you nothing. All right, it was very limited for public consumption. It's still out there if you want to look at it. In fact, I will show you a copy of it. So you can kind of look at a comparison of what it is and what you're getting now. So the old report was this. It was literally a PDF that I put together, my predecessor put together. It's a whole host of a bunch of pivot tables, worksheets. That's all it was. It was useless for public consumption in terms of how governments are trying to kind of move towards more data for the public to have in regards to how we operate. And that's what we're trying to do here. So this does provide you a lot more transparency. We talked, and this meets the standards of the Government Finance Officers Association. So GFOA publishes a list of criteria for how to develop basically a good budget book. I am going to submit this for consideration of one of their awards to see if we meet that merit. We already get the award for the financial reporting, so for the ACFR. We've never applied for a budget award. We've never applied for a public budget award. In the past, this would be the first time that we've done it. But this meets all of those standards. And the standards are about 6 pages in length. So everything is in here. There's a budget overview. You can click on any of these. You know, priorities, issues. You know, we talk about everything in here. There's great summaries of all our funding sources. For those of you who like pictures, it now comes with charts. You like pictures, so you're like great. So, but you can, you know, slice and dice these any which way you want. You can consume these any which way you want. In some instances where there were expenses or where there was information that was part of the old budget book that we couldn't replicate here, it's in there as an attachment. So you can click on this attachment and these pages essentially look a lot like what you saw before. Because we couldn't replicate this table in budget book, but we said, hey, we can still put it out there. You can look at it if that's what you want to do. But I mean, it's everything and anything. Staffing is in there. We put, for those of you who are interested, you know, kind of all our funding sources. In terms of funding summaries, one fund that's in here that is not generally considered like a reporting fund is DSEG. But I know there's a lot of interest in like DSEG information, in our kind of our expenses, our history. Again, you know, the adopted budget from the board, you know, what are we spending on? I mean, you can break these apart if you want to not look at, you know, let's say you don't want to look at any other fiscal year, but fiscal year 25, you can compare any which way you want. This is all fed by data that comes directly from our budget system. It's a table on the back end. We upload the data into it and this just goes, whoop, it just updates. But because we've never done this, everything had to be created from scratch, which is why it took 4 months to write. It rightfully so, the board was told that it was not available for the adopted budget. One of the reasons that it was also not available is because the board adopted a budget that didn't include the legislative budget changes. They didn't go back and revise their budget until August 15th, when we could include all the legislative budget changes. And that just has a lot to do with the fact that the legislature didn't adopt a budget until the second to last week of June.
Right.
So by that time, the board had approved the preliminary budget. We adopted a budget by the 15th of July, like we're required to. We revised, this includes all of those revisions. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of reasons for this because this is the first time that we're doing this in a commitment to be more transparent and more accessible to the community. This also breaks it down by department. If you want to look at, if you want to look at just the cohort of departments, or if you want to look at, let's say you want to look at what kind of the spending in African American Student Services, the name of Dr. Stroger, what it's been looking like over the last several years, what are the sources of funding. There's a spreadsheet breakdown in here that is integrated that will give you for the last 2 years plus the budgeted year, down to the actual object level. Like, you want to know how much is spent on state retirement in ESSER 3, you can see it here if that's really what your heart desires. So you can see this is a ton of detail. This is replicated across, and then what we're spending in terms of functions by expense type, so in African American Student Services, over 59% of their budget is spent on supporting other instruction staff, followed by guidance services, improvement instruction, so on and so forth. Every single one of the department and school pages is like this. It has its same information. It's built individually for each type of department and school. So, you can see whatever you want to see is in here. So the hope is that by giving this much more information, make it a little bit more easily digestible than a bunch of charts that told you nothing. Because that's really what it did. It did nothing. Cool trick for those of you who are into social media, you can share any of these on either Facebook or X, if that's what you want to do. You can actually lift this chart and share it on your Facebook page if you want. So, I mean, 21st century, we're getting away from publishing, printing things. Now, there was obviously a comment in regards to the fact that this can't be printed. There is no error by either the Financial Services Department, and there is no error by opening them. The reason it's over 1,000 pages is because the amount of detail here is far greater than the amount of detail in the PDF. We didn't have charts. We didn't provide you a history of the district. We didn't provide you an org chart. We didn't provide you a whole lot of things that are here that are now here. So 1,000 pages, yes, if you want to print it, it's 1,000, it's over 1,000 pages according to Open. We are the largest school district. We are the only school district in Arizona using this system right now. There are other entities, City of Flagstaff uses it, City of Tucson is gonna start using it. So there are other entities, municipalities, mostly counties that are gonna start using this. Like I said, there is a printing option. It's not meant to be printed in its totality. You can print it. The instructions that we're not gonna have to publish on the website is you can print it in like, small bite-sized chunks to ultimately achieve the goal of getting your PDF. What it does is when you hit print on any one of these, you pick what you want or what you don't. If you want the whole thing, I mean, there is a select all button and you will select, but if all you want is, I just wanna know EDI for the last couple of years, what it does, it sends you put your email address, it sends you an email and it says, we've received your request. It can take up to 3 hours to process. When it's done processing, it emails you a link for you to download the PDF. That's all it does. We've tried it multiple times. It works. Yes, if you try to print all of that times 88 schools and 40 departments, it's going to crash. It's just the way software works. I can't do anything about that because this is hosted by a server that is owned by another company. This happens with our accounting system sometimes. We've tried to run some things in our accounting system. Sometimes it will crash. We have to break it down into more bite-sized pieces because that's the way you get open. But we're not stopping anybody from printing if that's what they want to do. But we've made the recommendations time and time again, print in and you'll get what you want. If you choose not to do it, then that's entirely your fault, your problem. We are not printing a PDF. We are not, there is no PDF that exists. The district does not have one. I do not have one. This is what this is. All the data that, like I said, is being fed into here comes from the vision system, our enterprise resource management program, so our ERP. So I will be presenting this to the board on October 15th. So you'll get to see, I'll get to show it to the community as well as the board so that they can see that this exists. We presented this to our unions a couple of weeks ago. The unions, we meet with our unions heads every month. They were very excited about being able to see this because they can see a lot more detail. I certainly welcome any comments, any questions, anything that you think we're missing, anything that you think we need to add, because this is the very first one. Right, and we want this to be the first one of many because we want to promote more consumption. If there are pieces in here that you think are missing, what do you think should be in here if it's not here? Obviously, we're not gonna go down to like purchase order number 1245, but we're not gonna do that. That's not what a budget book does. But we're trying to be better. We're trying to do better and so yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have questions, comments, concerns from the committee. Anything that you think of?
Let me say one thing.
Pardon me, I don't believe you're supposed to be in the middle of
Okay.
our operating
Okay.
meeting, okay? I'm sorry. Bernie?
Just a few questions. Will this be the basis for what you use then for future budget approvals? Since obviously it wasn't used this year, it's being unavailable.
Yeah, it's the other way. This is not the basis for budget approvals. Right? There is no requirement in state law to present this. This is a practice that this district has put into effect, is to provide a budget book when we provide the required forms. They jive with each other, right?
Well, clarify that for me, because
Right.
I'm not familiar with, come out again, the city, towns world, and there are technically just a half dozen required budget adoption schedules.
Yeah,
Everything else is optional at
Yeah.
that point. That's what we would necessarily have as the addendum.
right.
Is that how this works?
That's really how this
And will
works.
this be
This will
effectively
be
the
in there.
addendum?
Yes, this will be effectively the addendum. This will be essentially an illustration of the forms.
And
Right.
that's necessarily what the board adopts, is that those required.
Yeah.
components.
Yeah, there
And
is
that's what they did
in
prior to June 30,
Yeah.
and then what again is an amendment, or rather as a adjustment, or.
Yeah, yes.
Here and.
Yeah, because unlike municipalities, right, where they adopt and then you guys can change.
Well, actually
Yeah.
not, and that's the thing, is it becomes actually a fix. At a
Oh, I
point,
mean, right,
you have up until that affixed.
yeah,
point.
and with us, with school districts, there, we don't have that limitation, right? So we're required to make revisions, especially if the Department of Education directs you to do them. So, for example, the annual financial report that I'm gonna take to the board on the 15th, that will essentially trigger a revision. I know it will because there are numbers in there that I need to update in the fiscal year 25 budget. There are estimates that just have to take place as part of the budget process.
And that is A, acceptable or allowable, and B, not uncommon.
Not uncommon, right, they just don't. The way the school district budgeting process is set up, it just doesn't follow that same thing, that same process. That's why Chris was talking about the fact that we're still finishing reconciliations. I mean, our fiscal year didn't close until August 20th. We have 60 days after June 30th to close, right? And then we still reconcile because there's a lot of adjustments that we still have to make. There are issues with Title I that we have to adjust. There are some indirect cost journals that we have to post. All of those ultimately then close once the AFR is posted. That way they have a final trial balance to then look after and say, do we need to, how do we test it? So it feeds into a lot of external accounting processes that are not budget related, but obviously they feed into one another. But yeah, the goal is, this is an addendum to the
It's
document.
supplementary
Yeah,
or
yeah.
support to those
Correct.
required.
So when you revise the budget, will you revise what's out here?
I won't revise this. These tend to be static. We want them to be, I mean, if the board wants them to be revised every single time we go out there, only one version can really exist at a time out here. You know, when the city of Tucson or Pima County, for example, adopt a budget, if they make changes, which they do throughout the year, even though they're staying within their budget limits, they're not republishing a budget.
Okay, no, just, well, one point in time.
So 6/30 is the end of the fiscal year. When would the new one of these be available?
The goal is for it to be available by the time the board adopts. So when we go like, you know, around the second week of July-ish, I mean, it could always be before then. So around the 15th is the deadline to adopt. We would have that, this link would be available at that. Because by that point, we're we're finishing with our budgeting process. Our budgeting process actually will start next month for
Right.
fiscal year 26. And it'll peak, you know, from about February to April, and then we'll be finishing off by May. In that timeframe, we're already, we've already had presentations to the board on a lot of the big topics that are gonna be the budget. Capital, things like that, the bond, things like that. So, so yeah,
Okay.
but it's there.
It's always about getting educated to a new system.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So next is our discussion regarding, and I put this on here, the next item. I think we partially covered it, but anything else anybody wants to talk about or directions? I wanted to make sure we'd have the right to talk about the events that occurred at the board level relative to the internal auditor and what we might or might not do as a result of that. And I think we've kind of opened the door, and we're gonna use the charter kind of as the big ship going through the door. And then behind that ship is the discussion relative to this item. If everybody goes along with that, I'm fine with saying, let's just continue. All righty. Next is a discussion regarding hiring an internal auditor assistant. And in a conceptual, just to open it up, not necessarily to have to talk about it today, was keep it on the agenda and see where we're headed again with the charter and the whole thing, because if we're going to take full advantage of the function, which kind of falls within our realm, it may be appropriate looking at the productivity and seeing what kind of productivity increase we might want to support. That was the purpose of putting that there. So any comments for now? Or
I think
just,
it's a good idea, and I think if we keep it on our next agenda as well, and solicit some, maybe some input as to staffing requirements for similar organizations, whatever references we might find, just,
great, yeah, great.
how many, we feel we're understanding what's the right number. And so, to the extent we can get some comparative information, maybe from IIA or some other sources, that shows if if the audit universe is this big and it's this organization, what kind of staffing levels are you looking at?
Well, and I think at this moment, after the hiatus caused by the quote pandemic and all of those dysfunctional activities that occurred, and I'll ask your opinion, do you believe we kind of we need to re-educate the board about what we're going to do beyond the charter? Just say, okay, we're really here to get something done. We don't need any practice. We've all had a lot of practice, and we're here to add value. And so how do you feel we can maximize the value we're adding to you? And how do you think we might most efficiently deliver that message to the board?
Well, again, going back in history, and I know Bernie's probably going to be our, the closest link to what we had historically before 2020, and then with 2020. When would you get on board?
In 2018.
Okay, so from what I understood, kind of after the, I guess the 2020 start is kind of when the board kind of just slowly, weren't getting quorums, or it was cut down for a while. And it was hard to get quorums for a couple years. And then when I came in as the the liaison for the committee, I think it was you and Bill Kelly that I really just kind of talked to, and we really didn't have, could get quorum to have these types of meetings. We were able to get Kevin involved, and then from there, Ray. and just started forming together. And I think, you know, even when Kevin and I spoke with Rob Ross to kind of find out what policies and procedures, what we need to do to get this committee up and going, to revive it and make it better than it's ever been before. And I feel, based on what I've seen in the past, we have a robust group of individuals that are overly qualified to do this, and we can set a new level where we can go. I'm grateful and appreciative of every single one of you to get on board. Just like me, we get paid the same. You know, and we're not doing this because, you know, we have nothing better to do, because I know we all have things to do. But we believe in governance and helping our community and do better. So based on, you know, information like this, if we find out in our charter that Martha needs more assistance moving forward. But I think telling the board is, here's who we are collectively. This is what strengths we have. This is what we feel we can benefit you. Because I think other than Ravi, he was on the audit committee for a while. I don't think any of the other board members have been involved with audit. And I'm not sure, well, none of them were here when it got voted on in. So most of them don't know what really the audit committee necessarily does. I know Sadie was at one of the meetings and she kind of, you know, finding out a little bit more. But I think educating the board on what we can service you guys can offer us is huge. So I think that would be going in, like I said, go in with our new charter, you know, and then come in. This is what things we can help you with. This is what we want to do. This is how we can be a service to the board, because we don't want to have to think about these things. We want guidance from the audit committee, and that's why I believe you guys are an important part. That answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
and you know, I guess I compare it to, we're the equivalent of the guys that'll not really know how to fix the air conditioners, so the kids are cool in school. All right, well, thanks, Phil. Any other comments, or we'll move on? I'm trying to stick to our discipline of 4:30. Information regarding reporting your concern to the Tucson Unified Audit Committee. I'm trying to remember why I put that on the agenda. Being brutally honest, I guess I should be.
We talked about that earlier, as far as what, you know, as far as anonymous complaints or concerns.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add at that point. How about you, Ray, or anybody else?
Well, I think it's something that we, there's something in the charter that addresses that. We may need to revisit that and maybe strengthen it, but as far as if someone wants to voice a concern about anything, they want to do it through the audit committee, is there is the mechanism that's in place adequate to make sure that you get it before anybody else?
Well, then, let's make sure we've included that again in a way that keeps its visibility in the charter.
Okay.
Yeah, we need to start pushing to get better and better in any level controls.
Yeah.
That's what you're asking. A whistleblower.
And now it doesn't come here.
Yeah. That's not good.
I'm not sure what we're talking about here, because we've had for a very long time. I think even prior to perhaps the existence of the internal audit function, but yet when the committee existed, this is prior to my time, a mechanism that I thought is on the website. It has been on the website throughout this time, to be able to provide for a relatively anonymous notification of an issue, for which historically the chair has been one to be a recipient of those notices. And I think council, I'm not sure if it has any broader initial delivery than that.
You mean,
But in my time of being chair, that never had a posting So I never saw it in action, but there was
Okay.
always, there has been during my time on the committee, conversation about, it's that whether or not, you know, this mic is on, kind of thing, because we weren't getting anything.
Right,
And that previous chairs or other committee members would ask about whether or not it was in effect. But historically, there hasn't been there hasn't been a deluge of posting through that process, but it's out there. There's a mechanism.
This is on the audit committee.
Yeah, there's a mechanism, but is it effective and efficient?
Well, I understand that could be the scope of our conversation.
Yeah.
But there is a mechanism, and I'm not sure that's partly why I came into it. I'm not sure what we're talking about here, because it sounded like we're not maybe even aware of that. And there is that. Wanted to be sure that that's a baseline for us.
Right.
To start this conversation.
okay.
And adding on to what Bernie said, like, is anybody home, right? We regularly test this thing because nothing seems to come, it's only one way, there are other ways that people.
Right.
Do it, but, because we don't get those, we've occasionally tested and it comes to me, we've added you to it. This week, did you see an email?
This week?
Well, I don't know if you were on it before, but I made sure that communications this week said, okay, it's going to you and it should go to your TUSD.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I haven't seen it. It could
Is that
be
not,
there,
is
but I
that
haven't
not the
seen
right
it.
place to send it? If there's a better way to do it, then let us know.
Okay,
We'll have technology services, make sure it goes to a better place for the chair. If the TUSD email isn't it, but we do this periodically because, hey, we haven't received any complaints. Is this thing on? So we'll ask them to do a test and, you know, I'll get an email that says test and the chair will get an email that says test and
okay,
we'll say, yep, got it.
all right.
So that's that avenue. If you want to propose changes to that, you know, absolutely, you know, have a discussion about it and make recommendations.
All right.
For at least the online, which isn't everybody's cup of tea.
And to clarify, that's why the agenda item is perhaps today, when it wasn't always, that it says through various avenues. It doesn't limit it to this.
Right.
That provided it has some kind of, suppose, condition. I don't know if that means documentation or something, but to otherwise be brought into this body, it could occur by another means other than that.
Just a general
But
question.
we don't have a kind of a definition of that.
How many whistleblower complaints does the district get a year?
Whistleblower complaints, like under the statute?
Yeah.
Or this thing?
Under the statute?
I don't know if we've had more than one a year that would qualify under the statute. Hey, it's been the same at every district I've worked at. It's rare. I mean, there are a lot of complaints, but does it meet the standard of the statute? Not all that often, but for complaints to the audit committee, we've probably averaged one every year and a half.
You're saying there have been 4 in time of that? I think that's pretty great.
So is there a fraud risk assessment?
I don't know what you mean. What do you mean by that?
Has management ever prepared a formal fraud risk assessment?
I don't know that that's a function that any school district does, at least with that name. Maybe there's another name for it that districts do, but that's
How
not
corrupt is the United States? We're 24th on the corruption perception index. We're way down the list. Just because every other school district doesn't do a fraud risk assessment doesn't mean that this one shouldn't.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I want to know exactly what it is you're talking about before I say whether we have it.
It's where management sits down and says, here's all the different things that can go wrong in this school district that's under the umbrella of fraud.
Every other Tuesday night.
And we formally put that so that people can read it.
That's where we come.
No, I've never seen a document produced like that.
So can management step forward and start doing their job in risk assessment As I said earlier, we need an enterprise risk assessment. We need one for the financial statements. We need one for fraud. That's the bare minimum. Because we have a school district that's operational and has all these little children in it. We should have a risk assessment for operations because there are things that happen to children that shouldn't happen. How many pedophiles do you have working for the school district?
Convicted, 0. There's a statute that doesn't.
You know, I go back to my history and I didn't appreciate having a sexual advance when I was 12.
This sounds like the fraud risk assessment sounds like a great conversation to have with everybody. To set expectations for the.
John, I don't want to.
Management needs to own the internal controls of the school district. It's not a governance function. Management needs to step forward and say, these are the controls that we need to think about having because we have these risks.
So I don't.
I'm not management, I'm the governing board's lawyer, so I'm just saying, the governing board can set expectations for the superintendent, and that sounds like a great conversation day.
Okay.
This will continue. Next on the list, I put this on because I'm a true believer that particularly with the group that's now been assembled, having a change annually in the chairman, and so everybody gets more familiar with the system in general is really important. So I'm simply saying again, suffering under these rules of public disclosure, which I hate. I'd like everybody to think about at the next meeting, having the discussion and nomination and vote of a new chair to take over in the month of November, because that would complete a year. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that, including you, Rob, so I don't have to suffer under not talking about it. So that's enough of that. Future item 7.01, standing item, request for information, request by audit committee. I guess we always want more information. Tanya, are you willing to provide any? Just kidding. You as the internal auditor, is there anything that we need to do for you to make sure you stay on schedule?
Just stand up for me.
Well, we will do that. I promise you that. I know everybody in this group some a little better than others, and I promise you that.
Thank you. That's all.
We're on the same team.
Thank
you. Then with the power vested in me, we're adjourned.
I just want to say, I never requested a paper document. Who would want a 1,000-page paper document? I can't imagine anything more worthless. That was never requested. So deep verbiage.
Would you,
Thank you, Bruce.
I did. I already did. I sent it.
oh,
Yeah, I'm on it.
Sweet one, 17 million. That I suppose somebody.
I have to run, but I'm just very pleased to meet you.
Oh, it's a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you very
didn't
much for coming.
know you at all. I thought that was the most
I do,
absurd
that's why I'm telling you, this
and offensive thing, and so.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You got it.
It was a pleasure. Well, they have a set. And every board member, not the other, send an email to say.
Here in the state of Arizona, a county treasurer just sold $40 million and wasn't detected over 10 years.